Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. If we're talking with Scott, you know the NFL draft is 55 days, 3 hours, 56 minutes, and 56 seconds from this moment in time right now, according to draftcountdown.com. Scott, welcome back, pal.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
You got it. The scouting combine is underway in Indianapolis. You're starting to get some news out of there. We also, Leonard Fournette ran today, 4.51. That's getting a lot of attention. His weight is getting a lot of attention. So let's start there because he is one of the big stars of this draft. And Ezekiel Elliott, he really brought the running back to light. You know, that you could have been looking at running backs taken in that top 5 again. And I want to get your opinion on Fournette running that 4.5 today at the Combine at 240-plus pounds.
Yeah, not only Elliott, but Todd Gurley the year before. I think those two, their performances as rookies went a long way towards rejuvenating that running back value at the top of the draft. Fournette, like you said, ran a 4.51, which is outstanding speed for a guy who weighed in at 240 pounds. The criticisms, he only vertical leaped 28.5 inches. So if you're big into vertical leaps with your running backs, that might be a concern for you. It's not an issue in my mind. I think Dalvin Cook, who's 30 pounds lighter, only leaped 2 inches higher. So there's a lot of hand-wringing this morning about Leonard Fournette's vertical leap, but I think that's much ado about nothing. And then he struggled a little bit, too, in the positional drills catching the football, which isn't really a surprise. And the guy I've compared Fournette to all along is Adrian Peterson. And to this day, Adrian Peterson is not a good pass catcher and not a good blocker. So and I've criticized Peterson for that as well. But so if you're looking for a pass catcher, Leonard Fournette might not be your guy. If you're looking for a 2,000-plus yard runner with a freakish blend of size and power who can run over linebackers and run away from defensive backs, then Fournette's your guy.
Yeah, do you value Fournette as one of those top 5 guys, or is he a guy that you don't see, and I'd like to get your opinion on in terms of running backs in the first round in general. Are there more first-round graded running backs in this particular draft? You mentioned, of course, I'm sure you'll mention Dalvin Cook from Florida State, but is this a draft where you'll see more running backs go in that first round?
I think Fournette is special, and I'm really stingy with my elite grade. I've only given it to 2 players this year. The first is Myles Garrett, the defensive end from Texas A&M, who's going to be the number 1 overall pick. And then the second is Fournette. He is a special prospect at that position. And Dalvin Cook is very good as well. Dalvin Cook from Florida State, and there's some that would make an argument for Cook over Fournette. But the best way I guess I can kind of explain it is in the NBA, Steph Curry is a really good player, probably a Hall of Famer, first-team All-NBA, all these accolades. Steph Curry is great, but he's not LeBron James. Dalvin Cook is great, but he's not Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette's one of these guys who's kind of in a tier of his own. But we're going to see at least 2 running backs go in the first round here with those 2. With Fournette and Cook. And then I think the wild cards are going to be Christian McCaffrey, the running back / wide receiver / return specialist from Stanford. I think he's kind of on that first-round fringe. Alvin Kamara from Tennessee has some first-round buzz. I don't think that's going to happen. And then the biggest wild card of all at running back this year is going to be Joe Mixon from Oklahoma, who is arguably the number 2 or number 3 most talented running back in this draft and a first-rounder on talent alone, but has the off-the-field issue, and it remains to be seen how far that's going to drop him. I still think somebody pulls a trigger in the second or third round.
Yeah, and I thought T.J. Logan today, interesting, 4.37. I mean, he's a guy that might have moved himself into that day 2 field.
Yeah, I've been a big fan of T.J. Logan for a while. He was one of my favorite players that was invited to the NFLPA All-Star Game. I was a little surprised they got him because in a lot of ways they're the third tier. I thought he'd get an East-West Shrine invite. And his teammate has actually got a lot more publicity and headlines during their college career. Elijah Hood, he was a big-time recruit coming out of high school, scored a lot of touchdowns, and also is in this draft. He came out early, but I think Logan is clearly the superior pro prospect, and I had him in the late round draftable range before his performance of the scouting combine. So he's done nothing but affirm my grade, a draftable grade on him. And I think he has the problem he's facing is this class is just so deep at running back. We had 19 underclassmen come out at the running back position alone. So these guys are going to get pushed down. In a lot of years, I think TJ Logan, maybe he's a 4th or 5th round pick. This year, he might be a 6th or 7th rounder.
Wow. All right. Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com here. Let's look at the position that is usually the glamour position, and that's quarterback. We know the Eagles probably not going to be in that mix, but they get a lot of attention. What about this year's crew, though? I mean, this is a group that doesn't seem like it's going to get a lot of attention, but we always know teams will reach for quarterbacks.
No question. And I think where the scouting combine is concerned, one notable thing already is only 3 of the quarterbacks there are measured in taller than 6'4". And that was Deshaun Kaiser from Notre Dame. It was Davis Webb from California, and it was Brad Kaya from Miami. So teams in the market for that statuesque pocket passer, the options are somewhat limited this year. For me, I have Kaiser as my top-rated quarterback. I have a similar grade on him as I had on Carson Wentz, Paxton Lynch, Jared Goff last year, just outside the top 10, mid-first round. And then I don't even really have a surefire first-round grade on any other quarterback. I have 3 guys who are in that late first, early to mid-second round fringe, top 50 category. Mitch Trubisky from North Carolina, who others are a lot higher on than I am. There's talk that he could go as high as number 1 overall. I don't think that's going to happen, but I could see him sneak into the top 10. Then, of course, Watson from Clemson, and Pat Mahomes from Texas Tech doesn't get as much publicity as those other names, but he's in that mix as well. So this quarterback class, as it has become in a lot of ways in the recent years, it's beauty in the eye of the beholder. What are you looking for? Which guy do you fall in love with? And who are you comfortable kind of hitching your fortunes to?
If you look at the last year's group, which, you had Carson Wentz and Jared Goff go 1 and 2, do you like last year's duo better than this group?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that today, and if Kaiser was in last year's group, I probably would have had him number 2 behind Carson Wentz. I think I had Carson Wentz number 10 overall, Lynch 11 overall, and Goff like 14 overall in my final rankings. So I like Kaiser just a little bit more than Lynch. I think he's a little bit more polished than Lynch was coming out of Memphis. So I would have no problem if the team reached a little bit and took Deshaun Kaiser in the top 10 overall, but he's the only signal caller in this class that I think I would feel comfortable taking in the top 10.
Let me ask you why we're on the subject of Wentz. Did he do better, exceed your expectations for him, what he did with Philadelphia?
Slightly exceeded. And that was a big transition he was making, not only coming from a smaller school, but also he didn't play a ton in college, basically only a little over 1 year of starting experience. So, and then also unexpectedly getting thrown into the mix. Their plan for him was kind of thrown in the trash late in the summer and heading into the season there, and they just kind of scrapped that and started over. So I think all things considered, he had a really good rookie year, and he didn't show anything that would make me feel uncomfortable with having him as my quarterback going forward, and certainly not to the degree of Jared Goff. Now, if you're a Rams fan, I think there's some reasons to be concerned. So, is Wentz a sure thing? Is he going to the Hall of Fame? We don't know yet, but I think for a young quarterback, considering his circumstances, he handles himself quite well.
All right, let's get into the nuts and bolts of some positions for Eagles fans out there. Wide receiver, let's start there and get your take on some of the wideouts here. There's some interesting names: Mike Williams, Corey Davis, John Ross. Give us some breakdown of the wide receiver group and what you've seen so far from this group. Is it a deep group at wide receiver? The Eagles will pick 14th.
Yeah, it is a deep group, and that's certainly one of the positions the Eagles will be looking at, if not the first round, shortly thereafter. And for me, Mike Williams from Clemson is the top pass catcher in this draft. I think he's kind of in a tier of his own. Some would make an argument from Corey Davis from Western Michigan, who I also think is a first-rounder. But I think Mike Williams is a legitimate top 10, and you can even make a case top 5 overall talent in this whole draft. Just a big, physical, number 1 go-to target. And if he were there for the Eagles in round 1, I think he would be a dream candidate for them. Otherwise, Corey Davis from Western Michigan could be a possibility if Williams is off the board. But honestly, for me, and I was just working on wide receiver rankings earlier today, so I have some fresh thoughts on it. And if I couldn't get Mike Williams in round 1, I think I'd rather wait on wide receiver. I'd rather have a Cooper Kupp from Eastern Washington or a Juju Smith-Schuster from USC in the second round than maybe a Corey Davis from Western Michigan or a John Ross from Washington in the middle of the first round. So value-wise, even though I like Davis and Ross, I think there's some good receivers that are going to be available there in round 2. So I would wait if I couldn't get Mike Williams.
All right, so if you're not taking one at 14, how many, is it deep enough that, hey, guys in the third round are still going to be very enticing for you?
Yeah, I think once you get past that top 5, that group that I've already talked about, then you start getting into some question marks and maybe guys who are more suited for specialized roles. Maybe they're slot receivers, maybe they're number 2 types and vertical threats. A couple of names I would mention that could maybe be that all-around option at position in the second day. Malachi Dupree from LSU, who a pretty good track record. They produced some pretty good receivers despite the quarterback issues LSU has had, and Dupree was a victim of that as well, just like Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham and guys like that were during their college career. So Dupree could end up being a value pick in the second or third round. Chad Hansen from California, only 1 year at Cal, but had a really great season. I think he's going to test better than people expect, and I think he's going to be in that day 2 mix. So those are a couple names, and one more I'll throw out there is a wild card. Noah Brown from Ohio State came out as a redshirt sophomore, was never really the featured guy in that offense. Had he gone back for one more year, developed, had proven himself in a larger role, we could have been talking about a first-rounder a year from now. I kind of compare his situation a little bit to Martavis Bryant, where you could be getting a first-round talent in the 4th round. I don't think he's quite the freakish athlete that Bryant was, but that's the type of pick where you invest a mid-rounder and get an early-round return.
Who's overrated in that group for you?
Wide receivers, just in general?
Yeah.
I would probably go with D.D. Westbrook from Oklahoma. It was probably the name I'd point out, because I think most assume he's going to be a second or third round pick, and there's even been some talk maybe he sneaks into the latter part of round 1. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't even have him as a day 2 pick. I have him as a day 3 pick, and he's very slight. He's about 6 feet tall, but he's only about 175 pounds. He's very fast. He's a vertical threat, but there's some issues there with D.D. Westbrook in terms of what type of role he's going to be able to assume at the next level. Oklahoma wideouts have a pretty sketchy history when it comes to translating to the NFL, and also some off-the-field issues there with Westbrook. So he's a guy that's probably going to go somewhere in the top 100, but I wouldn't take him in the top 100. I think you can get a similar type of player with much better value later on.
What's your take on Corey Davis? Because, he's got the size. A lot of people like him, but Western Michigan, you got a Max School there. Is he a guy that you're investing a first-round pick on?
Yeah, I have a first-round grade on him, and I'm not quite as high on him as some. As I mentioned earlier, there's some who feel he's maybe a top 10 overall pick and even better than Mike Williams. And my view of him might have been slanted a little bit by during my initial evaluation of him after his junior year. I wasn't impressed with his explosiveness or his athleticism. He was playing with an injury at that time, so maybe that affected him. I think he did look better as a senior, but I just don't see him in that same class as Williams. I think there's a distinct drop-off between the two. And honestly, as good of a player as Williams is, and John Ross from Washington as well, explosive playmaker, both of those guys are going to go somewhere in that top 20, top 25 overall. I just think there's value. They're not so much better than the guys I could get a full round later that I would take advantage of that depth this year. So
and Ross,
Corey Davis.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Ross would be a guy that would be in that Deshaun Jackson mold, or is he a little bit more physical than a guy like Jack? I mean, he's Jackson's. Yeah. Jackson's just so thin and seems like more of the one-trick pony. Ross in that but 4.3 40 time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've definitely heard the Deshaun Jackson comparisons with John Ross, Brandon Cooks, that type of player, and had a terrific year, just scored 17 touchdowns, and he's a big play waiting to happen. Can create after the catch. The issue with him is he's not really big, and he's got a number of injury issues. He's had 2 or 3 pretty major injuries, and that's what scares me off John Ross. I think you could. That's probably why I'm not going to have a first-round grade on him, even though on talent and on tape, he's a first rounder. I'm a little worried about that durability. And given the choice between John Ross at number 20 or Cooper Kupp at number 40, I'll wait and take advantage of that depth.
All right. So if you're a team that needs a receiver, this is a good draft for you.
It is, yeah. But I think you want to get one in the first 2 to 3 rounds. I don't think you want to wait any longer than that.
Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. All right, let's shift over to corner, another area where the Eagles need some help. Now, talking to some people out there at the Combine, some people have compared this to the Odell Beckham draft in terms of wideouts, that draft, was just loaded with wideouts, that this is similar for corners. Would you go down that road?
Yeah, and I could even make an argument for safeties as well, but especially at corner. Now, this position, you can wait all day. You're going to get a starting caliber corner, I think, in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round. So there's plenty of depth at corner this year, and I'm kind of intrigued how that's going to affect the team's plans. And Philadelphia is a perfect example of that. They need both a cornerback and a wide receiver. They're picking at 14. If they feel there's more depth at corner, maybe that pushes them towards that wideout there at number 14. So I think that's going to be a factor that all these teams are going to have to consider, because this is the type of year where I think you're going to be getting cornerbacks a round or two later than you normally would.
That's interesting. So you wonder what that does to the whole dynamic of taking it. If you're at 14 and you've got a guy, let's say Sidney Jones is sitting there at 14, but you're just saying, well, I can get a guy in the 4th round that I think could start. Maybe I go Rasul Douglas from West Virginia, and I just wait. So that could make it a very interesting dynamic in terms of drafting corners in this draft.
And for a team like Philly, you could probably make an argument they could use a couple. They could use a 1st and a 4th. And they're at an interesting spot there, too, because it's going to be interesting to see where the runs start at cornerback and wide receiver. They could have their pick of the litter at wideout at 14, and there might be only 1, maybe 2 corners gone. So they could be looking at, I think Lattimore from Ohio State will be gone, but Sidney Jones from Washington, I think, could be there. Marlon Humphrey from Alabama, Tease Tabor from Florida. So Philly's set up pretty good for where their needs are and where the talent's going to be available. But if I were them, if Mike Williams were there, that would be a no-brainer, and then I'd get that corner in round 2.
Interesting. Who are some of the corners that you like? I'm looking at draftcountdown.com, your rankings. Marlon Humphrey at the top of that list. Lattimore number 2. Who are some guys that stand out to you if you're at 14?
Yeah, and I mentioned the 4 names, Lattimore, Humphrey, Jones, and then Tabor's interesting just because he's such a ball hawk and he's a playmaker, and that just goes such a long way. We know how important turnovers are in the game of football, and when you have a defensive back who can be a factor like that, I just think that only increases his value. But then I think there's a little bit of drop-off to the next tier, but Tre'Davious White from LSU, that program certainly has a very good pedigree in terms of sending defensive backs to the next level. A very smooth cover guy. Really impressed at the Senior Bowl, and he's going to be in that late 1st, early to mid-2nd round mix. Quincy Wilson from Florida. Some feel he's a better prospect than the aforementioned Tabor. Maybe not the playmaker, but a better all-around player. And then Gary Conley from Ohio State gets a little underrated in that super talented secondary there with Lattimore, who's probably going to be a top 10 overall pick. The safety, Malik Hooker, was probably going to be a top 10 overall pick. But Gary Conley actually was a starter last year, and he might not have as much upside as those guys. He might not be as physically talented, but just a rock-solid cover guy. And if he's available somewhere in the middle of round 2, I think you're going to be very happy with that value. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I could go 10 more names, whether it be Cordrea Tankersley from Clemson, Adoree Jackson from USC, who was interesting because of his return ability as well. Fabian Moreau from UCLA's got some buzz right now. Just a ridiculously deep crop of corners.
And you're looking at corner and wide receiver as 2 areas of need for Philadelphia. So it looks like 2 spots that have depth. Where's another spot in this particular draft you like?
Tight end is awesome, and part of it is it's just a really good class, but it looks particularly good compared to what we've had the past 2, 3, 4 years, where there's been just kind of a dearth of talent, especially high-level talent. This year we have 2 surefire first-rounders, and O.J. Howard from Alabama and David Njoku from Miami, and then outstanding depth. I really like Adam Shaheen from Ashland. He's a small school kid, but really talented, and it kind of just depends on what you're looking for. Do you want that Jordan Reed H-back type? You have Evan Ingram from Ole Miss. You have Gerald Everett from South Alabama. Do you want maybe that big athletic red zone threat? Bucky Hodges from Virginia Tech. He's a converted quarterback. He's 6'7", terrific athlete. So there's a little something for everybody at tight end this year. And just put in perspective, Jake Butt from Michigan, who a lot of high praise, a lot of accolades in his college career. He's coming out. He unfortunately hurt his knee in the bowl game, which is going to impact his draft stock a little bit. But at one point was being talked about as a first-round pick. You might be able to get him on day 3 this year.
I want to real quick get your take because I see a tweet out here at Washington receiver John Ross, who we talked about meeting with the Eagles, which obviously they're doing their due diligence. But if they took him at 14, is that taking them too high?
No, I think you can justify that on the talent. I think there's the caveat if he stays healthy. That's just such a big concern. But he's definitely the type of receiver the Eagles need or are looking for. You hear Brandon Cooks is on the market, and I believe I've heard the Eagles linked to him at one point, similar type of player. So that's the type of guy they're looking for, and I think you can make an argument talent-wise for Ross there. And he is of the top receivers in this draft, he gives you something the other guys don't. That Mike Williams, Corey Davis, Cooper Kupp, Juju Smith-Schuster, he gives you that speed, that explosiveness, that ability to score anytime from anywhere on the field. It's just a matter of will he stay healthy. And if you go back and look at his medical record, it's a little disconcerting.
Yeah, that's something that the Eagles, he had the ACL injury, a couple of meniscus injuries there, microfracture surgery. That's something that is big deal there for a speed guy, right? So that seems like a lot of red flags. Overall, this draft over the last couple of years, where do you rank it?
It's always tough in it, but it's certainly not the worst. That year with Eric Fisher, it certainly stands out as the worst year in modern history. So it certainly isn't that. I would say it's on a scale of 1 to 10. I would say it's an 8. It's a really good draft. The devil in this draft is going to lie in that second tier. For my first tier, I have Myles Garrett, Leonard Fournette, but then you have a second tier that has about 10 players in it probably, and we were still kind of figuring out how that's going to sort out, and I think that tier is going to ultimately determine how good of a draft this was in the long run.
Who's your top player?
Garrett's 1, Fournette's 2. That's where it gets interesting. I have a Jonathan Allen from Alabama 3, although he's got some question marks. Apparently at the Combine is revealed he has some arthritic issues in both of his shoulders, which is a little bit of a concern. But the guy I'd mentioned that second tier that I think is going to rise and get more buzz here as we lead up to the draft is Solomon Thomas, the defensive end outside linebacker from Stanford. The tape is outstanding. I think he's going to test a lot better than people expect, and I think he's going to be in play as high as number 2 overall to the 49ers when all is said and done.
It's always fun, a lot to dive into with the draft officially taking over now as the Combine is underway. Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com for all of your draft needs. Check out the website and all the rankings, position by position, mock drafts. It's all up there, 55 days away from the NFL draft. Scott, we hope to be talking to you again soon.
Good chatting as always.